Welcome. This channel is dedicated to quiet horror and unsettling stories. I'm still new here, so your support truly means a lot. Now, sit back and enjoy tonight's story. The cabin wasn't on the map. I don't mean it was hard to find. I mean it simply did not exist on anything that should have known it was there, not on my phone, not on the trail app, not on the printed hiking map I'd stuffed into my backpack like an old habit. The path that led to it was narrow and oddly smooth, as if it had been walked often but cleaned after each visitor. I was already tired when I noticed the woods had changed. The air felt colder, but not because the sun was going down. It was the kind of cold that comes from shade that doesn't move. Even my footsteps sounded muted, swallowed by moss and wet leaves. No birds. No insects. Not even wind. Only the faint creak of trees standing too still. Then the clearing opened, sudden and clean, a perfect oval in the forest. And there it was. A one-room cabin, dark wood, low roof, no chimney smoke. The door hung slightly open, just enough to show a slice of darkness inside. The windows were strange. There were two, but both were covered from the inside with boards that didn't match the rest of the cabin, like someone had nailed them up in a hurry and never came back to fix it. I stopped at the edge of the clearing. Something about the place made my skin tighten, the way it does when you realize you've been watched for longer than you thought. I scanned the trees. Nothing moved. Still, I had the same clear thought, sharp as a warning. Leave. But I had maybe an hour of daylight left, my phone was at 12%, and the trail behind me looked less familiar than it should have. The forest had a way of rearranging itself when you weren't paying attention. I stepped forward. The porch boards didn't creak. That was the first wrong thing. Old cabins creak. They complain. They make themselves known. This one accepted my weight in silence. Inside, it smelled like damp wood and metal, like rain on rust. A lantern hung from a hook above a small table. A narrow bed sat against the far wall. One chair. No clutter. No personal items. Not even dust. On the table lay a single sheet of paper, folded once. I picked it up and opened it. The handwriting was neat, patient, as if whoever wrote it had all the time in the world. If you are reading this, you are already late. Below that, the rules began. Rules for staying in the cabin. 1. Do not leave the cabin after sunset. 2. If you hear footsteps outside, do not look through the door. 3. If the lantern goes out, do not relight it. 4. If someone knocks more than once, remain silent. 5. If you see lights in the trees, close your eyes and count to 100. 6. Do not respond to voices that know your name. At the bottom, one last line. If the rules change, it is already too late. I read it twice. Then a third time, slower, as if the words might rearrange themselves if I blinked. A prank, I told myself. Some hiker's joke. A weird tradition. Something people did to scare newcomers. I checked my watch. 6:43 p.m. Outside, the light had already begun to tilt. The trees around the clearing looked darker than they should have, their trunks forming a wall of vertical shadows. I walked to the door and looked out, not through the crack, but from the doorway itself. The forest looked patient, like it was waiting for the sun to touch the horizon. I shut the door and slid the latch into place, more for comfort than belief. Then I lit the lantern. The warm glow made the cabin feel smaller and, for a moment, normal. I sat on the bed, boots still on, and tried to laugh under my breath. That's when I heard the first step. Not inside the cabin. Outside. One slow footfall on the soft ground near the porch. Then another. And another. They didn't crunch leaves. They didn't snap twigs. They sounded careful, controlled. As if whatever was walking knew the exact spots that made no noise. Rule 2 lit up in my mind. Do not look through the door. I stared at the lantern instead, willing it not to flicker, as the footsteps moved away from the porch and began to circle the cabin. One full loop. Then another. My throat dried. My hands tightened around the edge of the bed. The steps stopped directly in front of the door. Silence. A shadow slid under the gap, stretching across the floorboards like spilled ink. It didn't look like a person's shadow. It looked too thin. Too tall. Like something standing at an angle that bones shouldn't allow. The lantern flame trembled. Once. Twice. And then it went out. Darkness dropped onto the cabin like a blanket. I froze. Rule 3, if the lantern goes out, do not relight it. Outside, the footsteps resumed. But now they were closer. And mixed into them, I heard something else. Breathing. Slow. Wet. Patient. Right against the door. Then, very softly, someone knocked. Once. Just one tap. Rule 4 only mattered if it happened again. That tiny gap in the rules felt like a trap laid for my curiosity. I kept my mouth shut and my hands flat on my knees, listening for the second knock, watching the lantern's dead wick like it might suddenly flare and betray me. Outside, the breathing stopped. As if it was listening too. The second knock came slower than the first. Not louder. Not harder. Just deliberate. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Rule 4 echoed in my head, sharp and absolute now that it applied. If someone knocks more than once, remain silent. I pressed my tongue against the roof of my mouth, afraid that even swallowing might make a sound. Outside, the forest answered with silence. Then the knock came again. A third time. The door shuddered slightly, not from force but from pressure, like something had leaned against it to feel how strong it was. My heart slammed against my ribs. I stared into the darkness, trying to remember the exact placement of everything in the room, afraid I might knock something over if I moved. A voice followed. Soft. Calm. Close. You can open the door now. It wasn't angry. It wasn't threatening. It sounded patient, almost understanding, like someone who knew I was scared but expected me to do the right thing anyway. I didn't respond. The voice sighed. I know you read the rules, it said. You always do. That sentence sent a cold wave through my chest. Not because of what it said, but how it said it. There was no curiosity in the voice. No uncertainty. It spoke like this wasn't our first conversation. Something shifted outside, and the shadow beneath the door stretched farther across the floor. It moved unnaturally, like it was bending around an invisible corner. Staying quiet won't help you forever, the voice continued. It only helps you until the next part. The lantern above me creaked softly on its hook. I flinched. Rule 3 still held. The lantern was out. I was not supposed to relight it. Darkness was safer than disobedience, even if my instincts screamed otherwise. Outside, the voice moved. Not footsteps. Not scraping. It moved like sound itself had changed position. I'll make this easier, it said gently. And then it said my name. Perfectly. Not mispronounced. Not guessed. Spoken with the kind of familiarity that only comes from repetition. Rule 6. Do not respond to voices that know your name. My jaw tightened until it ached. I forced myself to stay silent, even as the urge to answer rose in my throat like a reflex. The voice waited. I could feel its attention narrowing, pressing against the door, against me. When I didn't respond, the voice changed. Not angry. Amused. Good, it said. You remembered that one. Something else joined it then. Footsteps. Not one set. Many. They came from all directions, surrounding the cabin, careful and synchronized, stopping at equal distances from the walls. I imagined shapes standing just beyond the trees, spaced evenly, facing inward. Watching. A faint glow appeared through the cracks between the logs. Lights. Dozens of them, scattered through the forest like eyes catching moonlight. They flickered slowly, pulsing in uneven rhythms. The glow seeped into the cabin, crawling along the floorboards, climbing the walls. Rule 5. If you see lights in the trees, close your eyes and count to 100. I closed my eyes immediately. 1. The forest exhaled. 10. Branches bent. I heard wood strain under pressure. 20. Something brushed against the outside wall, slow and heavy. 30. The voice returned, closer now, so close I could feel warmth on my cheek. Don't count, it whispered. That rule doesn't apply tonight. 40. My pulse roared in my ears. I kept counting, each number an anchor. 50. The lights flared brighter behind my eyelids, red and white flashes burning through the darkness. 60. A hand, or something shaped like one, dragged along the door, nails scraping lightly across the wood. 70. The cabin creaked, settling, like it was adjusting to new weight. 80. The voice laughed softly, pleased. You're doing better than most, it said. Most people open their eyes. 90. Everything went quiet. At 100, the world seemed to pause. I opened my eyes. The cabin was dark again. The lights were gone. The footsteps had vanished. The forest had returned to its unnatural silence. The lantern relit itself. I hadn't touched it. On the table, the paper with the rules lay flat, illuminated by the yellow glow. I stepped closer and felt my stomach drop. The rules were the same. Except for one new line, written beneath the others in fresh, dark ink. Rule 7, do not trust the rules to stay the same. As I read it, the door behind me creaked softly. Not from a knock. From something testing the latch. I didn't wait for the next knock. The moment I heard the latch shift, I stepped back from the door as if it had suddenly become hot. My eyes went to the paper on the table, then to the lantern, then back to the door. The cabin felt like it was holding its breath. The forest outside felt like it was smiling. The latch moved again. Not opening. Not yet. Just testing. Like a hand learning the shape of a lock. Then, very softly, the scratching began. Not nails. Not claws. Something flatter. Something that dragged with patience across the wood, tracing the outline of the doorframe. I imagined a finger, too long, too thin, feeling where the boards met. A whisper slid through the crack beneath the door. Not a voice. A sound shaped like one. It carried my name without speaking it. Rule 6 rang in my skull, do not respond to voices that know your name. I clenched my jaw and stayed silent. Behind me, the lantern flame stretched. It leaned sideways, as if pulled toward the door. The scratching stopped. And then the cabin knocked back. 3 taps from inside the wall behind the table. Not loud. Not random. Exactly 3, evenly spaced, like punctuation. My skin went cold. The sound hadn't come from outside. The cabin itself had made it. As if the room had learned the language of the rules and decided to speak. I stepped toward the table and stared at the paper again, willing it to stay the same. The lines were steady. The ink looked dry. Rule 7 sat at the bottom like a threat disguised as advice. Do not trust the rules to stay the same. The lantern flickered once. The paper shifted slightly, as if nudged by a breath. A new line appeared beneath Rule 7, written in the same neat handwriting, forming itself stroke by stroke as though an invisible pen was moving across the page. Rule 8, do not stand with your back to the door. My stomach dropped. I turned instantly, pressing myself sideways against the wall so I could face the door without my back to it. The scratching returned, faster now, and the latch jerked as if something had tried to lift it with sudden impatience. Then the door stopped moving. The cabin went silent. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then I heard footsteps again, inside the cabin. Not mine. Soft steps on the floorboards near the bed, where I had been sitting earlier. They moved slowly toward the table, stopping just on the other side of the lantern's light, where shadows gathered thickest. I didn't look directly into the dark corner. I couldn't. Looking felt like answering. The footsteps stopped. A breath came from the darkness, warm and close. And a voice spoke, gentle again, almost friendly. Good, it said. You're reading fast. I didn't respond. The voice continued anyway. The rules aren't meant to save you, it said. They're meant to shape you. The lantern flame trembled as if it agreed. I stared at the paper, searching for anything that told me how to handle something already inside the room. The original rules were about outside, footsteps outside, lights in the trees, knocks on the door. Nothing about footsteps behind me. Nothing about a voice inside my own air. The silence stretched until it felt heavy enough to crack. Then the voice asked a question in a tone so normal it felt like a trick. Do you want to leave? The word leave hit me like thirst. Rule 1 said not to leave after sunset. It didn't say I could never leave. It didn't say how long this lasted. It didn't say when sunrise would feel safe again. The voice whispered again, closer, the words almost brushing my skin. "You can leave right now." I swallowed hard. The cabin knocked again, 3 taps behind the table, like a warning. My eyes dropped to the paper. Another line appeared, written fast, almost impatiently. Rule 9, if you hear a voice inside, do not believe it is alone. A sharp pressure filled the room, as if the air had thickened. The lantern flame shrank. The shadows grew darker, deeper, like wet ink soaking into wood. The voice chuckled. "You see?" it said. "The cabin tries to help you." The footsteps in the dark corner shifted. Another set of steps answered them, coming from the opposite side of the room near the window boards. Now there were 2. Maybe more. I held my breath, trying not to give them anything to measure me by. The door latch rattled suddenly, violently. The cabin shuddered. The lantern went out. Darkness slammed down again. Rule 3, if the lantern goes out, do not relight it. I stood perfectly still in the dark, my hands open at my sides, my heart beating so loud it felt like it might call them closer. And then the lights appeared. Not in the trees. In the cabin. Small points of pale glow, floating in the dark at different heights. Too many to count. They pulsed softly, like eyes adjusting. Rule 5 said to close my eyes if I saw lights in the trees. It didn't mention lights inside. But Rule 7 existed for a reason. I closed my eyes anyway. And I began to count. 1. A breath touched my ear. 10. Footsteps shifted around me, circling in the dark. 20. The door creaked as if it had moved a fraction. 30. The voice whispered, pleased. Wrong rule. 40. Something brushed my shoulder, light as hair. 50. The cabin tapped 3 times again, louder now, like it was trying to interrupt. 60. A hand, cold and careful, rested on the table beside me. I could hear the wood compress under its weight. 70. The voice spoke my name again, closer than it had ever been. 80. The lantern hook creaked overhead. 90. Silence. At 100, the room stopped breathing. I opened my eyes. The lantern was lit again. The paper on the table had a new line, written as if it had been waiting for me to finish. Rule 10, do not count in the dark. I stared at it, shaking. Behind me, in the shadowed corner, something inhaled slowly, deep, satisfied, like I had just done exactly what it wanted. And the door latch lifted, not preventing them. They were always late. The door creaked open a few centimeters. Cold air spilled in, carrying the smell of wet earth and old leaves. The forest beyond the threshold looked darker than before, not because of the night, but because it felt deeper, like the space between the trees had stretched. A shape moved just outside. Not stepping in. Waiting. The voice returned, no longer pretending to be gentle. You can still leave, it said. The cabin has done its part. The breathing behind me grew closer. You already broke enough rules, the voice continued. One more won't matter. I swallowed hard and looked at the paper again. The rules were changing. The ink on Rule 1 began to fade, the letters thinning until new words formed in their place. Rule 1, do not remain in the cabin after the door opens. My chest tightened. Another line appeared beneath it, written faster than the rest, like a correction added in a hurry. Rule 11, if you leave, do not run. The cabin groaned, deep and low, like it disagreed with something it had just written. The breathing behind me stopped. For the first time since I had arrived, the room felt unbalanced, like one side of a scale had been lifted. The thing in the corner no longer felt patient. It felt alert. The door opened wider. I could see the forest clearly now. The lights between the trees were gone, replaced by darkness so complete it swallowed distance. I couldn't tell how far the clearing extended or where the tree line truly began. The woods looked close enough to touch, even though I knew they were several steps away. Slowly, the voice said, just step out. The lantern flickered. I realized then that the cabin was afraid. Not of me. Of what waited outside. The breathing behind me shifted, closer still, and I felt a cold presence brush against my back, stopping just short of contact. It wanted me to move. It wanted me to choose. I took a step toward the door. The floor creaked loudly beneath my foot, and the cabin responded instantly. The walls shuddered, the lantern flared, and the paper tore itself loose from the table, sliding across the floor to rest against the threshold. New words appeared on it, carved deep enough to tear the paper. Rule 12, do not bring what is inside with you. My heart hammered. How? I whispered, breaking my silence without thinking. The voice laughed. That's the part you figure out. Behind me, the breathing stopped entirely. The absence of it was worse. I realized then that whatever was in the cabin was not bound by the rules the same way I was. The rules were written for me. The cabin wrote them to keep me moving, adjusting, reacting, surviving. I stepped fully into the doorway. The cold from the forest wrapped around my legs, sharp and numbing. The lantern went out again behind me, plunging the cabin into darkness. This time, I didn't look back. I walked. Slowly. Exactly as Rule 11 demanded. Each step felt heavier, like the ground itself resisted me. The forest seemed to lean inward, branches bending just enough to narrow my path. I could feel something following behind me, not footsteps, not breathing, but pressure, like a shadow glued to my spine. The voice spoke one last time, fading with distance. If you hear the cabin call you back. I didn't wait for the rest. I stepped past the edge of the clearing and into the trees. Behind me, the door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the forest, deep and final, like the closing of a mouth. And somewhere close, far closer than it should have been, I heard the cabin creak. As if it had stood up. The forest accepted me without resistance. The moment I passed beyond the clearing, the trees closed in behind me, not violently, but with quiet certainty, like doors that had never intended to stay open. The air felt thicker beneath the canopy, damp and heavy, carrying the scent of soil and decay. Every step forward seemed to sink slightly deeper into the ground, as if the forest was testing my resolve. I did not run. Rule 11 echoed in my mind, firm and undeniable. If you leave, do not run. I walked slowly, deliberately, placing each foot with care. The urge to flee clawed at my chest, but I forced myself to breathe evenly, to move like someone who belonged there. The pressure behind me followed, constant and close, like a shadow stretched too far. The cabin creaked again. Not behind me. Above me. I stopped. The sound came from somewhere deeper in the woods, a long, low groan of wood shifting under weight. I realized with a sick jolt that the sound wasn't traveling through the forest. It was moving within it. The cabin was no longer stationary. I resumed walking. The forest grew stranger the farther I went. Trees bent at angles that made no sense, their trunks twisted as if grown around something they had tried to avoid. The ground sloped gently downward, though I could swear I had been walking uphill before. Distance became unreliable. What looked far away suddenly felt close, and what should have been nearby vanished into shadow. Behind me, the pressure tightened. I could feel it trying to match my pace, trying to learn my rhythm. Rule 12 surfaced in my thoughts. Do not bring what is inside with you. I didn't know how to leave something behind that had no shape. But I understood one thing. The rules had always been reactive. They responded to danger after it appeared. The only time the cabin seemed uncertain, hesitant, was when I moved without guidance. So I stopped following them. I slowed my steps even more, almost to a crawl, then abruptly changed direction, veering left toward a cluster of trees whose trunks were scarred with deep, vertical marks. The pressure behind me faltered, lagging for just a fraction of a second. I turned again. Then again. Not running. Not stopping. Just refusing to be predictable. The forest reacted. Branches creaked overhead. Leaves rustled without wind. The pressure surged, then wavered, like something struggling to maintain its form. A low sound rose from behind me, not a voice, not a breath, more like frustration. I walked until my legs burned. Then, slowly, the pressure lessened. The forest began to feel normal. Not safe. But familiar. Birdsong crept back into the silence, tentative at first, then steady. Insects buzzed softly in the undergrowth. The smell of damp earth replaced the metallic tang that had followed me since the cabin. I stopped. Nothing followed. I waited, listening, every muscle tense, expecting the rules to return, expecting the cabin to creak again, to call me back. It didn't. When the sun rose, it did so naturally, light filtering through the trees in thin, golden shafts. The forest looked like a forest again. I found the trail less than 10 minutes later, worn and obvious, leading back toward civilization. I never looked back. I reached my car by mid-morning. My phone had signal. The battery was nearly full, as if it had never drained at all. I sat behind the wheel for a long time before turning the engine on, staring at my hands, half expecting to see ink-stained rules written across my skin. Weeks passed. Then months. I told no one. Sometimes, late at night, I still wake up expecting to smell damp wood and rust. Sometimes I swear I hear slow footsteps outside my apartment door, careful ones that know exactly where to step. But there are no rules. Not written ones. Until last night. I was walking home when I noticed a piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. Folded once. Thick. Yellowed. At the top, written in familiar handwriting, were words I recognized immediately. If you are reading this, you are already late. Below it, a new list had begun. Only one rule this time. Rule 1, do not pretend you escaped. I left the paper where it was. I haven't gone back to my car since. And tonight, as I stand at my window, watching the trees across the street sway in a wind that doesn't reach the ground, I can hear it again. A cabin creaking. Somewhere closer than it should be. Thank you for listening. If this story stayed with you, others are waiting.